So now that we got this FK leg set up, let's go ahead and explore the idea of an IK leg. So there's a couple interesting things we're going to have to do for the IK leg. These little legs out here are for that purpose. Now, we're going to delete the ball because we actually don't need it. We just need this joint chain here. And I'll go ahead and select hierarchy here, and we'll do a couple different things here. We're going to do a modify prefix hierarchy name. So that way we know what we're dealing with. This is a very important first step because our constraints inherit these names. So we'll want to know this is coming from an IK. And then you can clean up other things too. You'll see that it has joint 2 on these. If you really want to, you can come in here and kind of alter the names of those. Looks like it's just the top one that got changed. But the most important thing is to change the size, because this is actually going to go on top of our FK. So we're going to go ahead and do a select hierarchy here. Go ahead and set the radius to 1. That way we can see these. And we're going to snap these right back on top of our existing joint chain here so that it can control these. Now, what's important to understand is as we do this, we're going to want to disable the FK, but we're essentially going to want this IK to control that entire change. Now, before we do anything, we're going to want to get something set up for this. And usually for the IK, what I like to do is create a different looking control, something like a box here. I'll go ahead and hit Control D and Shift P, and then we'll go ahead and snap this down here to the leg. This creates some distinctive different information when we look at the leg, where a curve is for our FK and a box is for our IK. You can do it either way, but I like to get it set up this way and just take a moment here to kind of shape this to be the shape of the foot specifically. Now remember, in an IK system, inverse kinematic, it's going to make it so the bottom controls the top. And once again, if you are just joining us, check out some of our other videos exploring IK systems. I encourage you guys to possibly do the A-rig before tackling a full character like this, so you guys can get a feel for that. But this will get our box in place. Now, once we have this in place, we can go ahead and duplicate it across. And if you need to, you can mirror. I didn't do anything asymmetrical, so I'll just duplicate it and put it over here. And we can go ahead and freeze the transforms on these and go ahead and name them. Now, generally, I don't give these the orientation of the joint they're controlling because they're not controlling a joint, they're controlling an IK handle, so I leave these at world. This will be my LIK foot control. And this will be my right IK foot control. So if we want to at this stage, we can do a couple different changes. There are some things we're going to want to do that I haven't quite talked about. One thing is we do want to get a series of stabilization joints. So I did end up deleting the ball and the toe joint. Technically, we're going to want those back in here. So I'm going to duplicate these and actually go ahead and parent them back and go ahead and give them their respective names. This is me kind of spacing out because I'm doing this on a weekend, but this is going to be my IK ball joint. And I want to make this my, this is my left. And do the same here for the toe. And I forgot that we end up actually needing those for specific reasons. So let's go ahead and bring these back down. Go ahead and parent this in. And the reason why is ultimately we're going to let our IK control this. So this is going to be my RIK ball joint. And then duplicate that. And this will be my RIK toe joint. If you've seen our previous videos on IK, the reason we're going to use these is for stabilizers. All right, so very important factor for the feet. But let's go ahead and get this set up, kind of get our base setup going here. In order to create our IK, all we're going to do is take our IK handle from the top here down to the bottom control. We'll go ahead and come in here to rigging. We'll come into skeleton and we'll go ahead and create IK handle. We'll select the hip down to the foot. Now, a very important step is you're going to create this IK handle. What I want you to notice is the IK handle exists in 2 places. It exists in our outliner over on the side, and it's what's currently highlighted. And it also exists as something we can select. What I also want you to notice is its transform does have values. What that means is as soon as you create it, you want to grab this and then grab the control and hit P to parent. And what that's going to do is it's going to parent this underneath here, and it's going to make it so that this controls that joint chain. And there you go. You have your IK set up. So let's go ahead and repeat this to the other side. Just for more practice. Once again, you're going to go to skeleton, create IK handle. You're going to go hip to ankle. And then the moment you create that, you're going to go ahead and select that control and hit P to parent. And that way it will be in here. Now, what we need to do from here is we need to set this up to actually control our rig's joint chain. So that way we can visualize this. We're going to ultimately create an IK-FK switch for this, but for now, let's go ahead and just make it so we can have the IK control this so we can see what it's doing. We'll do so by selecting our IK joint chain, shift selecting our FK joint chain, and doing a constrained parent, and making sure that we have it all set up. I'm going to reset this so it's good to go and hit apply. And what that will do is it will allow this joint chain to control that joint chain. And you might be thinking, wait, isn't our FK already controlling that? Well, if you remember back to where we did the locator for our head and we had multiple constraints, you can use the constraint weights to toggle who controls what. So one of the things we're going to need to do is basically tell this to have the FK control it, or the IK control it. In this case, we want the IK, and this is why naming is so important. If you come back to the FK joint, you'll see now it has a series of constraints under this location for L hip control and L hip IK hip joint, right? So that's the control for the FK. This is the joint for the IK. To make IK affect it, all we'll do is set the 0 on the FK, and now this IK will control this. And we'll just repeat this process for each of these. We'll just come down here, and on each of the FKs, we'll input a 0. Later on, we're going to hook this up so it toggles between these two, but for now, we're going to get that set. The feet, we actually don't need to worry about. And at this stage, our IK is now going to control that. So you can see we have our IK in control, which is great. You also notice that our FK, if we go ahead and look at those controls, are kind of in place. So they'll stay put. But what we'll need to do is we'll need to actually set up a switch later that turns those on and off. But there we go. Our IK system's working. So let's go ahead and repeat this process for the other side so that we can get some extra practice in. Just remember what you're going to do is take that IK joint. Remember, I made mine bigger. That's the reason I did that. And you're just going to apply those to the next ones with a constraint, so that way they control them. And then we'll go ahead and just toggle that way. As a reminder, you guys don't see this, but I am hitting G to repeat the constraints when I select this here. I don't know why it looked like I selected both of those. There we go. And then we can do the same down here on the toes. All right, and now that should be set up, and we can just come into the FK once again and just zero out the FK weight, so that way the IK is in control while we are building it. I generally don't set up IK-FK systems for legs. Usually I just do IK because you can see it does add a lot of time. But I do, however, set up both for arms. So it really kind of comes down to the animator's preference. All right. Now let's go ahead and talk stabilizers real quick. It's been a minute since we talked stabilizers. When I grab my foot here and I lift it, notice how the foot is pointing downward. This is actually something we do not want. So what we need to do is introduce some additional IK handles that will act as stabilizers, and most importantly, make it so we can actually use the rotation on this control, because right now the rotation just breaks stuff. So after your initial IK handle, what you'll do is you go ahead and create another IK handle. This time you're going to go from the ankle to the ball, and then you're going to immediately parent that into this group. And then we're going to create one last one here, which is going to be from the ball to the toe. And that's going to come into play later for a reverse foot, and we'll parent that into the foot. So what you should end up with is a single IK control here that has 3 handles underneath it. We can go ahead and move this now, and if I do, you'll see that foot stabilizes. It stays level, but most importantly, it can now rotate, and it actually rotates the foot. You'll see that the knee's kind of doing a weird twist. That's because we need the pole vector on here, but this is going to make it so that our foot actually moves as intended and can rotate. What I like to do, though, is I do like to label these. So this will be my main IK handle here, the first one we created. So I'll make this my leg IK. This one here is my ball IK, and then this one is my toe IK. And these are nice to be tracking because, like I mentioned, we are going to use them later. So let's just repeat this process for the other side. Let's go ahead and go to skeleton, create IK handle. We'll go from the ankle to the ball, and then we'll go from the ball to the toe. Take both those handles and immediately parent them underneath the control. And then let's go ahead and give them names. So the first one here is going to be our IK leg, or our leg IK. I think that's what I did there. This one is going to be our toe IK. And then this one's going to be our foot. Oh, I got that backwards. No, I didn't. Okay, our ball IK. These ones are kind of out of order. It doesn't matter. You can move these. Just make sure you don't parent them on accident, and we'll be good to go. I also might want to delineate left versus right. So I could select all of these, for example. We could do a modify prefix hierarchy name and just put L underscore, and then do the same over here and just do R underscore. And there we go. So that way we know. All right, so we're not quite done with the IK legs. What we need to do now is we need to go ahead and set up that pole vector system that is going to allow this to basically be able to be bent and, distorted correctly. So let's go ahead and save here. I'm going to save this as a new iteration because we made a lot of changes. And if I made a mistake, I don't want my rig to break. And we'll go ahead and just grab something over here to be a pole vector. Generally with pole vectors, we just use little arrows. So I'm going to hit Control D, Shift P to unparent. And then I'll go ahead and snap this to the knee here. So we'll just V, snap to vertex, and we can aim this forward and do a quick modify freeze transform on this. And duplicate it over and get this set up. Now, I set up my knees a particular way, and I want to show you guys how and why I do it the way I do. In order to set a pole vector in its simplest form, and if you don't want to do anything super complex, you just want to get this up and working, I encourage you guys to do this. Just pull this out to where you want it to be. You don't want it to be anywhere near your knee. You want to freeze transform. And then you just want to take this. You want to select your leg handle that it's going to control. So you could go ahead and shift select this. And just do a constrain pole vector. And that's all you need to do. What that's going to do now is it's going to make it so this will twist the knee. However, you'll notice when you move the leg, the pole vector does not move. You will have to move it manually if you want it to do something. Likewise, when you move the torso, the pole vector does not move. So you will have to move the pole vector with the torso. Now, that's not a big deal because you need to move this foot anyway. You'll notice the foot doesn't move. But notice this doesn't exactly move with the foot either. So what I like to do is I like to set up some additional systems on top of this. But I just want to let you guys know if your goal is to just create an IK, you just want it to function, you want to move on, you can stop here. You don't have to do this next stage. Okay? Now, let me go ahead and undo till this pole vector is undone. And let me go ahead and snap this back to location here. And I'll go ahead and show you guys what I end up doing. What I end up doing is creating a group above this control. So I'll take the control here. First off, with the helper cone, I am going to do a modify center pivot. It sounds weird, but you want to make sure it's in the right spot. I'm then going to group it here. And with that group, you could do a modify center pivot. So it goes to the same location. You want these to be in the same spot. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to name this group my PV follow group, because what it's going to do is it's going to make the pole vector follow a specific path I tell it to. Now, what is that path going to be? It's going to be kind of twofold. I want it to stay in the middle of this here, right? This middle point, but I also want it to kind of aim forward at all the time, right? I want it to be aiming with where the leg's aiming. It's a pretty important factor. So let's go ahead and start with the first one. If I want this to stay basically in between the hip joint and the ankle joint, this is where I can introduce something like a point constraint. So what I'll do is I'll select the hip and I'll select the IK handle by shift selecting it. These are going to be my 2 points. And then finally, I'll go ahead and control click, or rather shift click the pole vector group here, do a constrain point. And what that will do now is it will make it so no matter what happens here, that is always going to be pointing between these two. It's going to maintain it and it's going to follow it. So we've solved one of the problems. But notice as the knee rotates, the pole vector doesn't. Now, what's important to understand is rotation on pole vector doesn't do anything. translate is what affects it. So this is mainly cosmetic. But if I wanted to make that aim, what I could do is I could go ahead and select the hip here. I could select the pole vector follow group here, and we could do a constraint aim here. And what I want to do is just make sure that it's aiming in that direction, which in this case is probably going to be Y. Now, I'm going to reset this tool because I don't remember what I did. And what I need to remember is that the aim is denoted as X, Y, and Z. So if I set this to Y1, this should hopefully get me what I'm looking for. So I'll just go ahead and set this to 1 and hit apply. Now, nothing happened, which is great because that's what we want to see. But when I rotate this now, you'll see it's going to be aiming in the direction of the leg. So it's always going to be aiming up with that as it's moving. So like I mentioned, this is just a nice to have. It's strictly cosmetic. And what we can do is we can go ahead and bring this forward. However, when we bring it forward, we want to make sure we bring it forward in a way that doesn't cause a pop between an IK-FK switch. And this is an important factor. When you switch between IK and FK, you want to make sure that it goes seamlessly. Now, you can create a fancy script that basically tracks the location points and rotations and gets them to be in the correct spot, which is something I generally do not do. Or you can just create a toggle that switches between them, and that's usually the approach I take. So let's go ahead and get that set up in terms of making sure that when we do switch this, it doesn't pop out of place. It stays right where it is. There is no weird setup here when we do a pull vector. So just to kind of show you guys what I mean, if I just pull this forward here and I select this handle and I do a constrained pull vector, you might see the joints move a little bit. Right? That's what we want to avoid. Now, in this case, I don't really see that happening, but let's go ahead and make sure it doesn't. Let me show you guys the trick for that. You can take a polygon plane here. You can go ahead and set this to be 1 by 1. And then we're going to delete a single vertex to make a triangle. And we're going to use these points to triangulate our joint placement. So I'm going to take this up to the hip by hitting V to snap to vertex, to the knee, and to the ankle. What we can do now is we can take that front knee joint here, double click our movement, and we're going to move along the UV space here. To do so, we can go to normal. And with this set up, we can just move this out in V or U. And what this will do is it will find the correct location for us, so we don't need to worry about this clipping. Now I got to move this out a ways here so I can find the right spot. And that's going to be the location I'm going to place this. As long as you move in U or V, it should basically make it so this does not pop out of place. N is going to be the one you want to avoid. With that in place, I can take my control. And we're just going to take the control. The group needs to stay where it is to follow this location, which is important to understand. And I'm going to snap to vertex to location here and just freeze transform. And then we're going to set this to be the pull vector. So we'll take the control here. And then we'll go ahead and shift select the pull vector here and do a constrained pull vector. And if we did this correct, we shouldn't see any shifting there. It should just stay put. And now when I move this, we should see that our control still is following this follow group we created. So it's always in front, always aiming. You can see even when I twist, it stays put. And now I can move it. And even when I move it, you'll see it's going to respect that. All right. So like I mentioned, this is kind of a nice to have. Not all animators are going to necessarily want this, which is good to know. So if you guys aren't comfortable doing it, you have no idea what I just did, don't worry about it. But what I would say is, like I mentioned, this is one of those things I love to have in a rig. If I don't have it in a rig, it kind of drives me crazy. So there you go. Now let's go ahead and set this up for the other side. I'm just going to create a locator here. I'm going to snap to vertex and put it in a group. Control G, scale X -1. That's going to track this point so I can delete my geometry. And now I can very quickly set up my other pull vector to have this system in place. I also didn't name this, so let me go ahead and just name this my LIK leg PV for pull vector. And we can go ahead and copy this name over here and just switch the L with the R. And do the same process. So let's go ahead and just hit Control G. I'm going to go ahead and steal the name here. I made this my PV follow group, but let's go ahead and denote it RL_. Copy that name, and we'll go ahead and switch this to our R_ follow group. Remember, a very important step here is to do a modify center pivot, so that way it actually jumps to the location of this knee. And then we can go ahead and set up our various constraints that we need. And they are all set to be in the correct setup here. So I can just come to my hip. I can shift select here to my locator, shift select here, do a constraint point. That'll make this jump to location. I can then select my hip. I can shift select my locator and do a constraint aim. Because I have the location of that locator, I can just V to snap to vertex and freeze transform. And then I can bring this back here to control the pull vector. I want to emphasize at this point that most of this that makes it look like a lot of work is me explaining it. Notice how quick that was. That was really quick. I don't even know if that was, 30 seconds. But that's going to get that hooked up for this side. All right. So that's going to get our IK legs in place and ready to go. What we need to do now is we need to look at that option of something like an IK FK switch, where we're going to put it, how we're going to program it. So we can switch between these two. So let's go ahead and get an IK FK switch set up so that we can control these. Now, you have a lot of different options when it comes to the IK FK switch and where you place it. One of the more common ways nowadays to do an IK FK switch is to kind of make a floating IK FK switch where you can find this and you can toggle this on and off for things like the legs or the arms. I don't really like this approach simply because it is just a control that kind of floats. What I usually like to do is attach it to something. And in particular, I like to use the placement control down here for these kind of things. So the placement control is kind of like that master control where we can store things. Sometimes people put it on the root control. I feel like that's kind of weird, because the root control is something you actually animate. But since the placement's kind of about initialization and placement, I find it's kind of a good spot to store these things. But like I mentioned, you can have floating IK FK switches. You could put them on whatever control you want. The main thing is don't put them somewhere that disappears. So for example, with the IK FK switch, we're generally going to want to have our IK rig disappear, our FK rig disappear. So that way we don't see it while we're working with it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add the constraints down here to this guy. I'll go ahead and go to Edit, Add Attribute, and we'll go ahead and create one here called our LIK FK leg. And we'll just make it a float with a minimum of 0 and a maximum of 10. And we'll go ahead and hit Add, and then we'll go ahead and add another one, RIK FK leg. And we'll go ahead and hit a minimum of 0, maximum of 10, and we'll go ahead and hit Add. Now what we need to do is use set driven keys to program these. Before we do that though, there's a little bit of cleanup that can be nice to do. For example, with the IK leg here, it can be nice to have the pull vector associated with it. So this is going to be my LIK leg, my L pull vector. Let's put those in a group, and we're going to just make this our LIK leg. And then we'll do the same for this one here. So there's not floating parts. That's the R, that's the pull vector, Control G, and we'll go ahead and make that our RIK leg. From here, what we can do is we can go ahead and start our programming. So let's go ahead and come in here to animation, to key, to set driven key. Set. We're going to load this in here as the driver, and we'll just do one of these at a time. So we're going to load these guys in here as the driven. Now, let's start with the most important thing and the most annoying thing. How do we get these constraints in here? That's the really annoying thing. So what we need to do is we actually need to control this guy's constraints first. We need to get these programmed. So the way to do that is you select the joint here and hit F, and you basically track down the constraint that is driving it, which you can find down here. Fortunately, there's not a lot going on in here, so we can find these pretty quick. But these are going to be the various constraints associated with this. So I can come up here to LFK hip joint, I can come down here, and basically any of these ones that have this constraint on here will be what I more than likely load in. So let me just double check this is a root parent constraint. So that we don't need to worry about, that's on the hip control. And then we have these ones here. Now, I'm a little bit confused why these are saying left though, because that's the right side of my leg. This is the left side of my leg. So it looks like these ones are located down here. So I must have not named things before doing these constraints, which could be a problem. But we'll see these guys are here. These are the ones that we want in terms of this. And this is going to be the toggle for the IK constraints specifically. And these ones here are going to be the toggle for the other ones. Now, we don't need to worry about the toe and ball. We just need the legs. So I'm going to grab these 3 ones here for the legs, and we're just going to load those as driven. Now I'm going to come to my LIK, and what we're going to do is we're going to take these here, and we're going to take these last 2 weight categories, and we're going to key these. You need to decide if you wanted to start an IK or FK. Personally, for me, I like my legs to start an IK and switch to FK, and my arms, I tend to like to start an FK and switch to IK. Depends on preference, depends on how consistent you want these to be, but we're going to constrain across these. Now, if you can, you could select these and find the weights as a group, but because these all have a bespoke name, you need to do them one at a time. This is already in IK mode, and I want IK set to 0, so I'm just going to click key on these, and then I'll repeat this process down the line here, so that the IK is currently in control here. What we can then do is we can kind of check this, and we can move the leg, and you can see for a fact that this is indeed in control here and controlling these. We can then come to our IK leg, left leg control here, set this to 10. And we can go down the process again, but this time flip-flop these. So from 1 to 0. And then we can select these 2 and hit key. And do the same here, from 1 to 0. Select these 2 and hit key. And do the same here, from 1 to 0. And then select these guys and hit key. Now, the tricky part is this is going to be a bit of a struggle because we have those constraints going on here. Like I mentioned, ultimately, we are going to make these controlled by something completely different. So we're going to have to determine exactly how we want this to go, which is going to be interesting. In this particular instance, if I wanted to, I could just go ahead and set these to 0 for now. And we could have the weights toggle between these. So we'll have to kind of make that determination or even parent them back to the world. But ultimately, we are going to make those controlled by something else. But you can see this will now switch between these. So we probably should have set up our foot first, but at least now we can kind of see this FK IK switch in action. And we should be able to toggle between these to make this reflect that, right? Now, for whatever reason, you'll notice that that snaps into place just fine, which is kind of funny. So as long as we don't have constraints on those toes, we're actually going to be okay, at least for the system. So for now, let's go ahead and leave those off. And if we really want to, we can actually delete them because we don't necessarily need them for the time being. So I could come into these controls here and actually just delete these constraints on the toes specifically so that the IKFK functions, and we can figure out how to fix that later. Now, there's another thing to this, though, and that's that I don't necessarily want both these control systems to show up. So that's where these rigs come in. When this is set to 10, I would like to take my left IK leg rig here and keep its visibility on. So what I could do is I could load that as the driven. We could come to visibility, and we click key. But when this is set to 10, I want that visibility off, so I can set that to 0, and I can hit key. So now, not only do we toggle the actual control system, we toggle the visibility of the controls themselves. And that's the reason why these groups above can be very useful, not only for organizing our scene, but for making systems like this easier to organize later. I'll do the same thing with the FK leg. Let's go ahead and turn that on, come into this hip control here, and we'll come to that leg master group. I'm not going to do the follow group. We're going to load this as the driven visibility. We'll go ahead and key that at 10. And then when this goes to 0, we'll go ahead and key that to 0 so it goes away. And then hit key. All right, so that will make it so we can toggle between these two. And most importantly, let's go ahead and set this back to 0, 0 so we don't have transforms. And that's going to get our basic IK-FK switch up and running. So it is a bit of work, but you can see now we can toggle between these seamlessly. And what's cool is it will actually switch between these different sets here so that we can actually toggle between these. Like I mentioned, we had a little bit of weirdness on the constrained toes. We'll tackle those when we get into actually setting up the toes. If we do need the constraints, we'll get those in place. If we don't, we'll just kind of leave them out. But that's going to be the system we need in place. So I'm going to go ahead and get this set up for the other side. The big change I'm going to need to do here initially is switch this to the right leg. Very important. And I do want to make sure I match the other side as well. Let's go ahead and track down the constraints for this. I'll grab the joint here and hit F, and we already know these are what we want. I'm going to delete the 2-foot constraints since I know those are problematic, and we're just going to grab these 3 here. Now make sure you're not grabbing that root one on accident, and we'll just go ahead and load those as the driven. From here, I'll just come into their individual weights and hit key so that they're stuck in the IK mode, and they're operating with the IK system. We can go ahead and move the IK handle out to confirm. And then what we can do is we can come back into the placement here. We can set the R to 10, and we can go through the process of flipping these. So I'll set this to 1, this one to 0, and then repeat the process down the line. This one will be set to 1, this one will be set to 0, this one will be set to 1, this one will be set to 0. And then we can go ahead and make sure we're clicking key on each of these. An important step I think I forgot to do here. So that way the IKFK actually works. And let me just double check I didn't actually break something. You have to be careful. Sometimes you'll hit the S key and it will go ahead and set a keyframe. So I got an error in my log, so I just want to make sure that's not the case. All right, cool. So it looks like those are switching up fine. Now, as you might have anticipated, we're going to do our visibility for these now. We're going to go ahead and take our leg. We'll go ahead and load this as the driven. Take the visibility here and key. Go ahead and crank this to 10, take the visibility here down to 0, so our IK loads out, and then do the same thing for FK. We'll come to our FK here, find the follow group here, or the rig group, not the follow group. Load that as the driven, visibility, and key, and then set this back down to 0, and then we'll go ahead and hit the visibility and key. And that will get our IKFK switches set up for our legs. We'll be doing this again for the arms, so if you hated this process, congratulations. Rigging's not for you. All right, so that'll get our base setup here, IKFK legs in place. It gets our switch in place. The next thing to do is just kind of consolidate this back with the hierarchy. And notice the behaviors are a little bit different. So one of the things I'm noticing immediately is the hips here have something kind of funny happening with the IK system in place. And this is one of those small steps that I forgot that with rigging, you know, all of a sudden something's not working right. What went wrong? Notice that even though we built our hierarchies correctly, we have everything connected correctly, our leg here, our IK leg specifically, is not connected into the root joint. So if you're getting this really weird behavior where your IK legs just kind of look stuck, they're not behaving correctly, make sure that you took the time to take your IK leg here and parent it back to the roots. And if you go ahead and parent that now, what we should start to see is a different behavior here, where that's going to follow. And if I turn on this one's IK leg here, you'll see it's actually going to interact with this. So very, very important step that I forgot to mention early on in the joint creation here is that we need to take that IK leg here, shift select that root and P to parent. Otherwise, it's going to give us some unpredictable behavior. So at this stage, our IK legs should be set up, and if we come in here, our FK legs should be set up, and we're ready to make this guy walk. What we need to do now is we need to move our way up to the arms, and we need to go ahead and get our IK FK arm set up, but that's going to get everything set up and in place for those legs. So go ahead and give this a shot. It is a lot to kind of get in and to build. Once you have it done, take a break, and then when you come back, let's go ahead and head up to the arms and then out to the fingers and then get our rig finished up.